On today's show, a Fred VanVleet rehab update from the man himself, plus the Rockets apply for a DPE in FVV's absence, plus what we want to see out of this team against the Raptors. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What is up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Fridays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. On today's show, we are going to be getting a Fred VanVleet rehab update from the man himself, who is back attending Rockets practices, and they're in a non-playing capacity, unfortunately, but it's good to see steady Freddie up and walking around and in good spirits. We'll hear from him about how the rehab's going, all that good stuff. The Rockets reportedly applying for a disabled players exception in the absence of Fred VanVleet this season. We'll get into what that means for this team, what they could possibly do with a DPE for the Fred contract this year, and how it does give them a little bit of a leg up on the competition when it comes to buyout candidates, that kind of stuff, a little bit later on. And then we'll get into what we want to see out of this team against the Toronto Raptors Wednesday night. First, I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being one of our amazing everydayers. And I appreciate everybody who was freaking out because I didn't have a video out about the Pistons. Like, everybody was like, Jack, are you okay? My bad. I should have sent out like a tweet or something. That's on me. But let's go ahead and get into, I appreciate you guys nonetheless. Let's go ahead and dive into what Fred VanVleet had to say at Rockets shoot around. He spoke ahead of the Rockets Nets game Monday night. So we're going to run back a little bit of that video right now.
What has this last month been like for you? How are you doing physically and emotionally?
Yeah, it's a hell of a question. It's been up and down, as you would expect. Obviously, whirlwind of emotions, from going down to learning that the injury, what it was, to getting the surgery, to rehab. I've hit every stage, so I'm in a good spot now. Just chipping away at rehab every day, and focusing on getting better and ultimately planning towards a return. So it's really slow right now. It's been tough to be out. You know how much work I put in and just my role and what I mean to this team. The worst part is just not being out there with the guys and not being able to contribute right now. So that's the hard part.
You'll still be able to contribute and help the team in some way?
Well, I'm not going to stop talking. So I'll definitely hear my boys. I'll be able to share things that I see, try to manage emotions, but there's nothing like being out there on the floor. I see, my leadership and what I bring to the table, on floor, coaching, all of that stuff is great, but it only counting because I'm out there. I'm gonna do my part while I'm not. There's a lot of things I can help with in between the games and days of practices, and I'll always do that. But yeah, it's amplified when you're playing. You got the play to match up with.
All right. So, of course, that was Fred VanVleet discussing his rehab process thus far. Shout out to Space City Home Network for their incredible coverage and for that video that they posted to social media. All right. First things first, with Fred, like, it is just really good to see him like around the guys and talking and communicating. And, in a weird way, I think the way to kind of envision Fred's role this season, right, is he's basically an assistant coach for maybe the entirety of the season. Like, I know the Rockets have yet to officially close the door on a return to action this year. Even in the most like aggressive, positive return timelines, like Fred would, be getting back like late March, early April-ish, maybe, if he's like really, really aggressive with it. Which would put him back potentially for some type of a playoff run for this Rockets team. But the likelihood of him being, the Fred VanVleet of like the last 2 years, right? The Fred that this Rockets team has grown accustomed to, very slim to none, right? Think about it, in a similar light to the Steven Adams rehab process, right? Steven Adams had like a 2-year rehab journey, not like identical injuries, but just, the fact that it just takes a long amount of time for these guys to go through the rehab process and then get back to a place where their bodies are even remotely close to what they were doing pre-injury. When it's an injury of this like level of severity, especially at this stage in Fred's career, but it's great to see him in good spirits about it. Getting to a stage where he's just up and moving around, and talked about, he talked about at one point, ditching the crutches and, being able to move around a little bit, which was a big step forward for him. And obviously there's no replacement. Like he said, there's no replacement for him actually being out there on the floor. But at the same time, having him as that extension of the coaching staff, having him there in the practices, still mentoring and teaching Amin Thompson and Reed Sheppard what he's seeing from the sidelines and how they can still grow and improve their games. It's not that Fred just disappeared, right? It's not that he's just hurt and he's just going to go squirrel himself away in his, loft or apartment or house or wherever and just hide from the world and focus on himself, right? He's still very much focused on the team element, being at games, supporting the guys when possible, all that stuff. And I think that speaks to Fred's character and also just like his desire for this team to ultimately succeed, which is why the Fred loss was ultimately such a big loss, because there are other guys that are going to step up and will likely step up throughout the season, but losing your floor general, your emotional leader, the extension of the coaching staff, the culture resetter, everything that Fred has meant to this organization goes so far beyond the box score, which is why even when we were talking about, in the aftermath of Tari's extension not working out, and like, maybe the Rockets entertain like a Fred trade or something like that. Essentially, that's why I had to, go into it with a gigantic grain of salt. Like, I just don't think the organization would do that to Fred. They value him so much. And it makes perfect sense, right? So ultimately, the Rockets are probably going to be without Fred for this entire season. Maybe he comes back, again, no concrete timeline there, unfortunately. What we do have concrete evidence of is the Rockets are applying for a disabled player exception in light of the Fred VanVleet injury. What does that mean for this Rockets team, given their financial cap restrictions? How could they still utilize the DPE to their advantage? We're going to get into that here in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Quo. Look, one of the tools that help make a huge difference for business owners is Quo, formerly OpenPhone. It's the same great business phone system you've heard us talk about before, just with a brand new name. And here's why it matters. Every missed call is money left on the table. When every customer conversation counts, you need a phone system that keeps you connected 24/7. Quo is the #1 business phone system that streamlines customer communications. It works right through an app on your phone or computer, so no more carrying 2 phones or relying on a outdated landline. Quo is great because what it allows you to do is share one number, one inbox, and collaborate on different calls and texts, and that prevents any customer from being left behind. So you can see why over 90,000 businesses trust Quo, formerly OpenPhone. You can get started for free and get 20% off your first 6 months at quo.com/lockedonnba. That's QUO.com/lockedonnba. And if you've got existing numbers with another service, Quo will port them over at no extra charge. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. Today's episode is also brought to you by Rippling. If you're a business owner, here's the truth. SaaS promised to make work easier, but now the average company is buried by hundreds of apps that slow down your teams and simply don't work together. That's not SaaS, that's SAD. Software as a disservice. That's why you need Rippling. Rippling is the unified platform for global HR, payroll, IT, and finance, all in one place. They've helped millions of businesses replace a mess of disconnected tools with one system designed to give leaders clarity, speed, and control. Rippling is great because it removes the bottlenecks and busy work that slow your teams down. Everything from onboarding to payroll to IT access runs automatically and perfectly in sync. It's simple to use and gives companies one source of truth for their people, data, and everything that they touch. And right now, you can get 6 months for free when you go to rippling.com/lockedonnba. Learn more at rippling.com. That's rippling.com/lockedonnba. That's rippling.com/lockedonnba for 6 months free. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, back when the Fred VanVleet injury originally happened, we speculated on the Rockets' ability to apply for, or officially apply for, the disabled players exemption, I apologize, exemption, whatever, same difference. The DPE essentially is what we're going to shorthand it to, which allows the Rockets to garner an exemption that is equivalent to up to 50% of Fred VanVleet's $25 million salary. So effectively, it gives the Rockets a $12.5 million exception to be able to go out and sign a replacement player for Fred VanVleet. That's how this thing kind of works, right? So you're not ever going to be able to get a player of equal value, caliber, whatever. It's not like the Rockets can just get Fred's whole $25 million off the books and go sign a different guy. However, here's the rub. And this is the bad news. And that's probably why the Rockets didn't do it sooner while there were still a handful of available free agent. I don't know, like a guy like maybe Campaign, whatever. There's a couple of factors here. First off, the Rockets are still very committed to the idea, at least, of allowing Amin Thompson and Reed Sheppard the time to grow into this role and see what they ultimately look like with the spotlight being on them, right? Obviously, much bigger roles for both of those guys than originally expected, given the nature of the Fred VanVleet injury. But that was the plan in going into the season anyways, was seeing what Amin could do as a ball handler, what Reed Sheppard can do as the backup point guard. Now, obviously, yes, the roles are bigger, but that idea still hasn't changed. That's why the Rockets ultimately didn't prioritize getting another guard in free agency, and that's why they went for a Josh Okogie type and not like another ball handler, floor spacer, point guard, floor general, shooter, whatever, because they wanted those reps to go directly to Amin Thompson or Reed Sheppard. So I don't think that the Rockets are going to immediately turn right around and try and go bring somebody in, or panic mode, bring somebody in. And that's why they didn't do it in the immediate aftermath of the Fred injury once they knew the severity of it. I think that they're doing it now because it's better to just have it and not need it than wish you had it and go through the rigmarole and the red tape to actually apply for it. But the reality of the situation is the Rockets literally can't do anything with it right now. They can't. They don't have space in the, they're pressed up against the first apron with only like a little over $1 million of cap space. And unfortunately, and this is the dumb dynamic with this exemption, is this exemption does not allow you to go over the apron threshold to sign a player, which frankly is dumb. Like being completely honest here, the way that it should operate is the $12.5 million that the Rockets would be granted against Fred VanVleet's salary. He's literally not playing. Like, it seems so dumb to me that you would have to count the $25 million salary and add an additional $12.5 million on top of it for penalty purposes. That $12.5 million should just count as part of Fred's $25 million. Like, because Fred is literally not playing. Like, that's the idea behind the DPE, right? Is, hey, okay, great. Like, your player's out. And look, if it's a star player, right, who's making $50-60 million, like, yeah, you can get up to a $20-30 million, exception to go sign somebody. And you're not going to get the identical quality level of player, whether it's a star player or, a guy in a role like Fred VanVleet's, because it's only 50% value of the contract. But it just feels so dumb that the Rockets were put in this position, an unfortunate injury, and then because of these, penalties and the apron money requirements and all this stuff, that they couldn't then turn around and use that exception or the exemption to be able to go actually get a legitimate replacement for Fred VanVleet ahead of the season. Now, let me backtrack for a split second and go back to my first point here. I don't know that they would have done it anyways, even if they did have the opportunity to go out and find like a suitable replacement, in part because that's kind of the the silver lining, the blessing in disguise about the Fred injury is, simply by necessity. Amin Thompson and Reed Sheppard have been thrust into these bigger roles. So the Rockets are, whether you like it or not, you're going to find out whether Amin and Reed are capable of running the show, in bigger roles, whether they will pan out and kind of just accelerating their growth and development. And as long as the Rockets organizationally and Ime Udoka and the rest of the coaching staff and, top down from ownership to front office to coaching and the players themselves, the team, as long as these guys all understand that there is going to be a natural kind of growing process for Reed Sheppard and Amin Thompson, then I commend them for going that route, because you might drop a few games here and there. There might be some games that are a little rough around the edges while guys are getting settled in, but that's kind of the upfront cost that you pay to potentially have a better Amin Thompson, a better Reed Sheppard down the line, even when you get Fred VanVleet back, whether it's late this season or, we're talking next season potentially. By then you'll have much more finalized, developed versions of Reed Sheppard and Amin Thompson to have an idea of, like, can they do this? Do we need to, trade that, whatever? How do they fit in the construct of the team? Amin's not going anywhere, but Reed's like the question mark. Although Reed's been balling out, so I'm happy for him. I will say just really quickly here that the Rockets will still have the exception. Their means to be able to actually utilize any sizable amount of the exception completely is tied to their ability to potentially offload some of the money that they have on payroll this season. So they would simply have to be able to offload a contract like not Fred, but they'd have to offload a contract like the Clint Capela contract, or maybe offloading one of the vet minimum guys at the end of the bench, right, from the Stay Ready crew. Maybe you do a trade for Tari Eason, right, because he's making like 5.7 million or something. And as long as you didn't take money back in any of these deals, trade them into a TPE or just open cap space for a team, whatever, or an exception, because you can trade into the MLE stuff now. Any of those avenues would work. And then that money that the Rockets would be able to open up by trading a player, they would then be able to turn around and use that DPE, exemption money to go sign somebody, either a buyout candidate, that might become available later this offseason, or a current free agent not signed to a roster. Although there's not really, I know Malik Beasley was cleared of the charges, but then that whole FBI probe dropped on Terry Rozier, and then the Chauncey Billups stuff, and that whole gambling thing was crazy. So I do think that ultimately, I don't know if Malik Beasley will be, have his name cleared and be available to play, but he would be the priority number one target that you'd think you could go grab with a sizable exemption from Fred VanVleet again, but you'd have to make space for him monetarily on the roster, which is the ultimate dilemma. They will open up space as the season goes, and you'll get a prorated version of the vet minimum contracts and stuff down the line. But ultimately what the DPE does is it gives the Rockets a leg up on other teams that are going to look at buyout candidates, who can only offer a vet minimum deal or something like that. If the Rockets are able to open up a little bit of additional space, then they can dip into that DPE to maybe offer a little bit more than a vet minimum deal to somebody to come in for a playoff push, whatever. The one name that I keep circling back to that might be a decent depth piece for the Rockets for the postseason, CJ McCollum. If he gets bought out by the Wizards, right? So he's a potential buyout candidate for the Rockets to be able to consider somewhere down the line. And look, the Rockets do a lot worse than a few 10, 12, 15 minutes a night of backup CJ McCollum minutes in the postseason, right? A guy who's been there, he's had some level of postseason success, and ultimately would be a veteran guard to kind of provide a little bit of a steadying hand to this squad if they, decide to ultimately go that route down the line. But I'm curious your thoughts. Are there any other names out there that are potentially going to be on the buyout market this season that you're looking at, or any other names aside from Malik Beasley that are on the current NBA free agents list that you'd like the Rockets to maybe try and orchestrate a trade for, open up some cap room to use the DPE to sign? Reminder again, it's up to $12.5 million to be able to sign a player for this season only. And again, the Rockets need to open up that space by trading money out if they want to use that. So they can't just use it right now. That's not how that works, unfortunately. But coming up, we want to share some thoughts on what we hope to see out of the Rockets-Raptors matchup, game 4 of this early season. What we want to continue to see this team focused on, growing and improving about, all that good stuff. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Peloton. Peloton is shaping the future of fitness with their brand new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus, powered by Peloton IQ. It's their most advanced equipment yet, designed to give you real-time guidance and endless ways to move, whether you're running, lifting, or cross-training with your favorite instructors. This is training reimagined. Peloton is built for breakthroughs with tools that help you plan, stay motivated, and reach peak performance. The Peloton IQ system is great because it offers real-time strength coaching. It actually tracks your reps, suggests the right weights, and corrects your form, making every rep safer and smarter. So let yourself run, lift, flex, and push forward. Explore the new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus today at onepeloton.com. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, let's talk a little bit about this Rockets-Raptors meetup here, game 4 of the regular season. I find it weird that the Raptors didn't just do like the full Texas Triangle, because they were just down here. They dealt with the Mavericks and the Spurs, and now like it's like a modified version of the Texas Triangle because they go all the way back up to Toronto to face the Rockets. I do not envy the NBA schedule makers, man. I don't know, because they do all this by hand. That's the crazy part. It's not a computer. Like it's nuts. Anyways, that's besides the point. Let's get into it. So the first thing on the surface that I was looking at for this matchup that I'm curious about is this will be a great kind of signifier. Does Ime Udoka decide that he wants to go back to the double big lineup, or does he stick with potentially Josh Okogie in the starting lineup, or does he completely change it up and go with like Tari Eason as the 5th starter? Because the Raptors do run a version of a 2 big lineup because they run Jakob Poeltl as their 5 and then Scottie Barnes at the 4 spot. And so theoretically, right, that'd be like a solid enough matchup for Steven Adams and Alperen Sengun to go up against and just see how the double big matches up. Although Scottie plays a little bit more like at times plays like a jumbo wing than like a big. And so, but that's a perfectly fine matchup. Scottie versus Sengun, Poeltl versus Adams. But the thing for me that I'm curious about is, does Ime, feel like that's the need? Like he has to go match up double big, or does he stick with Okogie in the starting lineup and he just goes with, allowing Jabari or KD to check Scottie Barnes, right? And then throwing the other guy on RJ Barrett, and then you got Brandon Ingram out there. Like, do they want the size and the length to kind of combat the Raptors' size and length outside of, Emmanuel Quickley? They've got a ton of size and length across all 4 other positions. And Quickley's also not like a tiny guard either. So that's going to be number 1, is just, does Ime want to gather more of that sample size of, Josh Okogie? And frankly, I do think that Josh Okogie would be great in this matchup to help slow down probably Emmanuel Quickley, right? You put Josh Okogie on Quickley, you put Amin Thompson on Brandon Ingram, you let Jabari check RJ Barrett or Scottie Barnes, whoever you feel like is, more of a hurdle for KD to guard, I guess. And then you just throw Sengun on Jakob Poeltl. It makes too much sense to do it that way. But ultimately we'll see what Ime does with these starters. For me personally, this Rockets team has done, I think, an okay job defensively so far this season, but continuing to work on patching some of those holes defensively, getting back to that intense physicality that this team has been known for the past couple seasons, right? It looked a lot better against the Nets. It did. But the Nets are also like a far cry different from the Thunder and from the Pistons as far as like level of competition. And the Raptors kind of fall into the same boat. Like Raptors are in this awkward position where they're like on the fringes of the Eastern Conference, which is like, that's exactly where you don't want to be, because that's one of the worst like 6 to 7 teams in the entire association, basically. Like if you cannot even guarantee yourself an Eastern Conference play-in spot with how weak the Eastern Conference is compared to the West, then yeah, you're one of the like bottom 7 teams in the NBA, unfortunately. So not a big test against Toronto for the Raptors, but hopefully another opportunity to kind of give them like a little bit of a tune-up game, right? Like, and you can't sleep on the Raptors either. Like they have talent on their roster. Like it's actually kind of a weird thing that they're not better than they actually are. But defensively, getting back to some of those coverages, right? The aggressive defense on the perimeter, and that's what a little bit of what it felt like Josh Okogie really provided last game against the Nets. And then just balancing that with the double big, right? How much do you go with the smaller size lineups versus mixing in and sprinkling in those double big lineups, which we did still see a healthy amount of against Brooklyn as well. And then offensively, there's still so many more like areas for the Rockets to grow and improve and adjust and continue to like acclimate to Kevin Durant. I want to see them continue to prioritize Kevin Durant early in games. Like it feels like that's kind of the move to just open things up offensively for other guys. And that takes a certain level of aggression from KD. But KD's also talked about previously that he's not just going to like, you know, force feed himself or whatever, and that he'll take what the defense gives him. And so if the Raptors come out with a game plan that is literally just go stop KD, right? Double him, triple him, do whatever you got to do, then other guys need to be able to step up out of those moments, right? And for me, the Kevin Durant passing has been a little, you know, mixed bag so far. There's been some great passing that we've seen out of him. There's also been some really like head scratching, like how did you even turn that over? You're 7 feet tall. Like why couldn't you make the pass over the defender? And so there's been like, it's, you know, kind of a mixed bag right there. I want to see KD continue to clean up his passing and ultimately like you're not going to ask KD to like, oh, he needs a tighter handle at, you know, 37 years old. Like KD is who he is as a player at this point. So expecting him to like suddenly, you know, grow or improve or change drastically is very unrealistic. But the reality of the situation is the Rockets do need him to have the ball in his hands a lot more than he's probably ultimately comfortable with, because he's not a primary initiator. He's not a primary playmaker. Like he's just not those things. Hasn't ever been in his career, won't ever likely be. But at the same time, he is a guy that can command the attention of the defense, and getting him comfortable, getting KD more comfortable running those two-man games with Alperen Sengun, running those pick and roll sets, whether he's the primary ball handler or he's coming off the screening action. Building that chemistry is going to be so important, because at the end of the day, the Rockets don't have a seasoned, stable, reliable veteran point guard that they can dump the ball to at the end of a game while you're running KD and Alperen Sengun off-ball actions away from the play to get him like coming off a pin down or a curl or something like that. They you know, it's going to be a lot harder to envision, you know, in like game 7 of a playoff series down the line, like relying on that versus just, hey, put the ball in the hands of your best player and let him go to work. And that's a reminder that, right, like both like Alperen Sengun's never played with a player like Kevin Durant, and Kevin Durant's never played with a player like Alperen Sengun. Like that's the thing, is Alperen Sengun is the most uniquely talented big man that KD has ever played with in his entire career. You know, and you can go like, what about Draymond? Like Draymond, yeah, Hall of Fame defender, incredible playmaker, not anywhere near the scoring threat or the post-up threat that Alperen Sengun is from a gravity perspective. So different players, right? And it takes time for these truly great players, these star-level players, to mesh and figure out their spots. You know, very rarely is it like just a perfect fit from day one. And even in those situations, right, sometimes it doesn't work out long term. So it's really important, I think, for Rockets fans to understand that this team is only 3 games in, and despite some of the mistakes and issues and like the turnover stuff in those first 2 games, like they still looked really good against the Thunder. They still looked really good against the Pistons for stretches of those games. And kept them close, right? It's not like they got like just blown out, like they were like a no contest kind of thing, like they weren't even in the same tier. And I think that's important to, you know, understand about this team, give them a little bit of time for things to start settling in. We're already 3 games in, and like certain things have already started looking better. Like the defense started, like took a major step forward against the Nets. Offensively, they're already one of the best offenses in the entire NBA. They're a top 5 offense after 3 games, despite dealing with the absolutely insane defensive, you know, powers of the Thunder and the Pistons. So like that speaks volumes about where the Rockets are at offensively this season, right? And how those things continue to look. I will say the free throw shooting has been maybe the biggest like change of like a competitive advantage for this Rockets team, and continuing to see them be aggressive and generate those free throws. It very much feels like they went into the offseason thinking, hey, we were dead last in free throw shooting and you know, getting to the foul line and free throw rate and all that stuff last season. how can we be better about that? And by doubling and tripling down on the size component and being bigger and stronger and more physical than other teams, like there have been through these first 3 games, the Rockets have gotten in the penalty, like, every quarter, it feels like, with like 5 or 6 minutes to go in the quarter, because they're just so much bigger and stronger, and you're fighting for rebounding positioning and all these away from the play fouls that are happening. They add up, right? And then for the Rockets to then be able to capitalize on those fouls, getting to the charity stripe and actually converting at a decent clip so far through the season. I know that they struggled against the Pistons from the free throw line, I believe it was. So like in the middle, right? I'm trying to pull it back up just so that I can confirm. Yeah. 37 to 48 from the free throw, which is still like a respectable percentage, right? You're still above 75%, like 77.1 as a team. Like that's not half bad at all. It's significantly better than where they were, just a year ago. And I think that part of their like newfound offensive identity, they're still going to be these offensive rebounding monsters. They're still going to attack the glass. They're still going to use their size, but to be able to have the free throw shooting as an additional weapon to rely on, right? If the Rockets can suddenly go from being a bottom 5 free throw shooting team to a top 5 free throw shooting team, both by volume and efficiency, that's going to skyrocket their offense, well into the top 5 of the NBA. And the fact that they've been prioritizing the corner threes so much this season has been a very welcome surprise, because that's the best, most efficient shot in basketball is a corner 3-pointer. So seeing the ways in which Sengun and Kevin Durant, even like Reed Sheppard to a lesser degree, have like been able to tilt the defense one way and then get the pass out to the corners for the wide open shooters, that's been pretty solid. On a much more like individual level in this game, I'm always interested to see how Alperen Sengun goes up against Scottie Barnes. Seeing how those two match up is always a little bit fun. I love Scottie as a player, and I love him as a defender. And I think there's actually a lot of similarities between Scottie's game and Sengun's game at the end of the day. They're not like identical players by any means, but just some similarities there in play style and approach to the game. And then just seeing maybe a bit more from Amin Thompson. I feel like he had that first really good game against the Thunder, and then he was just awful against the Pistons. And then he was better, significantly better against the Nets, but a bit more quiet offensively, right? Focused much more on that playmaking component, facilitating the basketball, had the 8 assists. And you love to see that from Amin Thompson, but I also still want to see him work on expanding and growing his game, especially just with the ball in his hands, right? Like attacking, getting downhill, finishing at the rim. That's maybe, ultimately priority number 1 on like my Rockets, like personal to-do list, is just the continued aggressiveness of Amin Thompson, Reed Sheppard, watching them, hunt for their offense, watching them do what they do and get comfortable within the Rockets system, because so much ultimately falls on their shoulders from a responsibility perspective, that the Rockets need them to be able to rise to the occasion to have success this season. But I'm curious what you're looking for against the Toronto Raptors. What do you want to see out of this Rockets-Raptors matchup? The first of a couple road games for the Rockets. They've got the Raptors, then they go to Boston, I believe it is. So it should be a fun little 2-game stint out east. Give me your thoughts on the Fred stuff, on the DPE in the YouTube comments as well. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.